You're sitting in a waiting room, gray chairs, a water cooler nobody's touched, a receptionist typing something that isn't about you. Your resume says $34,000 at the top. You've printed 6 copies. You check they were straight in the folder 4 times in the car. In 9 minutes, a stranger is going to decide what you're worth, using a number you made somewhere else, for someone else, that has nothing to do with what you can actually do. This is the story of how the same person, with the same skills, gets treated completely differently in the exact same chair depending on what number is sitting quietly at the top of the page. Level 1. Last salary $34,000. The interviewer is 15 minutes late. Nobody apologizes. You've already reread the job posting twice in the lobby, even though you know it by heart. She finally calls you in. She doesn't stand up. She glances at your resume upside down on the desk before she even says hello, and you watch her eyes land on the number. Not your name, not your last title, the number. So you're coming from $34,000, she says. Not a question, a frame she's about to build the rest of the conversation inside of. You explain your responsibilities. She nods, but it's the nod people give when they're waiting for you to finish so they can say the thing they already decided to say. We were thinking $38,000 for this role, she says. That's still a nice bump for you, right? It is a bump. On paper. But you notice she didn't ask what the role pays other candidates. She asked what would feel like a bump to you specifically, which means she already priced you against your past, not against the job. You take it. You don't negotiate, because you don't know yet that there's room to. Nobody at $34,000 tells you there's room. The room is the secret. The first rule. At $34,000, you're not being hired for the job. You're being hired at a discount off your own history, and nobody in the room is going to be the one who mentions it. Level 2. Last salary, $48,000. Different building, nicer chairs. The receptionist offers you water this time. Small thing, you notice it anyway. The interviewer actually reads your resume before you sit down. He asks about a project from 2 years ago, specific enough that you know he prepared. That alone feels different from level 1, where preparation was optional and you were the one expected to fill the silence. $48,000, that's solid, he says. Solid. Not a bump, not generous, just solid. Like you've crossed into a category where your number doesn't need commentary anymore. He mentions the range for the role, $50,000 to $58,000. He says the range out loud without being asked. You didn't know that was a thing that happened until it happened to you. You ask for $54,000. He doesn't flinch. He says he'll check with his manager. 20 minutes later someone calls back. $52,000. You didn't get everything, but you got asked. And being asked is new. You don't know it yet, but this is the first interview in your life where you weren't just receiving a number. You were part of setting it, even a little. The second rule, $48,000 is the level where the range gets said out loud, and the moment someone says the range out loud, you stop negotiating in the dark. Level 3. Last salary, $65,000. Now there are 2 people in the room instead of 1. A hiring manager, and someone from HR taking notes. You notice the extra chair before you notice anything else. Extra chairs mean the decision costs someone more to get wrong. They ask about your last salary. You tell them. Neither of their faces change. At $34,000, the number was the whole conversation. At $65,000, it's one line item among many, mentioned once and moved past. The hiring manager asks a question that isn't about your resume at all. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Nobody asked you that at $34,000. Nobody had time to care where you were going. They only cared what you'd accept to arrive. You ask about the range. $70,000 to $85,000. Wide range. Wider than anything you've been offered before. The gap between the bottom and the top of that range is bigger than your entire first salary out of college. They offer $76,000. You ask for $80,000. The HR person actually smiles just slightly, like she respects the ask more than she'd respect you not making it. You get $78,000. The third rule, at $65,000, the interview stops being about proving you're not a risk, and starts being about proving you're worth investing in. Different question. Different room, same chair, level 4. Last salary, $95,000. You get a call before the interview even happens. A recruiter, not the hiring manager, walking you through the process, prepping you on who you'll meet, what they care about, how to frame your last role. Nobody prepped you like this at $34,000. At $34,000, you prepped yourself, alone, in your car. 4 people interview you across the day, not because they're suspicious of you, but because 4 people want to be part of the decision to bring you in. You notice they ask fewer questions about what you can't do, and more about what you do with more scope than you've had before. They ask your last salary. You tell them. Someone writes it down without any visible reaction, the way you'd note the time on a receipt. The range for the role is $110,000 to $130,000. You ask for $125,000. The hiring manager says, "Let me see what I can do," in a tone that isn't stalling, it's problem solving. 2 days later, $122,000 plus a signing bonus nobody mentioned until this exact moment. The fourth rule, at $95,000. Companies stop interviewing you to find out if you'll fail. They interview you to find out how fast you'll help them win. And that question changes every single thing about the tone in the room. Level 5. Last salary, $150,000. The interview doesn't happen in an office. It happens over a video call that starts 2 minutes early because the VP joined ahead of schedule. And then, 20 minutes later, over dinner at a restaurant you wouldn't have chosen for yourself. Nobody asks what your last salary was directly. Someone on the recruiting team already has it, already built the offer range around it before you walked in the door. The number that used to be interrogated at $34,000 is now just data, handled quietly in advance, so the actual conversation can be about something else entirely. At dinner, the VP talks about the company's 5-year plan, like you're already part of deciding it. Nobody asks if you can do the job. They ask what you'd change if you started Monday, a question that assumes the yes already happened. The range $170,000 to $210,000 base, plus equity nobody explains in detail because they assume correctly that you already understand what it's worth. You ask for the top of the range. You get it. Plus an extra week of vacation nobody negotiated for, because somebody on their side decided it was easier to just give it to you than to let you walk out and think about it. The fifth rule, at $150,000, you stop convincing them you're good enough, and they start convincing you they're worth saying yes to. The interview flips direction, and neither side says out loud that it flipped. Level 6. Last salary $300,000. There isn't really an interview anymore. There's a conversation, sometimes over drinks, sometimes on a phone call that starts with, "So I heard you might be open to something new," from someone who found out through a person who knows a person. Nobody asks your last salary. They already assume a number in a range and they build backward from what it would take to move you, not forward from what the role technically pays on a chart somewhere in HR. The company sends someone to your city instead of asking you to fly to theirs. Small detail, enormous meaning. At $34,000, you took a half day off work, unpaid, and drove 90 minutes for the privilege of being evaluated. At $300,000, the evaluation comes to you, dressed up as a lunch nobody calls an interview even though it obviously is one. They don't post the range because there isn't a range. There's a number they're willing to go to, and a number below that they'll start at, hoping you don't ask. You ask. They go to the first number without much of a fight, because losing you would cost more than the gap between the two. The sixth rule. At $300,000, you're no longer being interviewed to see if you fit the role. The role is being shaped quietly around whether it fits you. Level 7. You are Tao. You ask. You are Tidrol Nadal, the was none. The tested. Low sake. Level 7. Last salary $600,000, you don't apply anywhere. Somebody calls you, a board member, or a founder, or someone who was told to find you specifically, not someone like you. There's still a conversation. It still, technically resembles an interview, but you're the one asking most of the questions. What's the real problem here? What's already been tried? What happens if I say no? The questions people used to ask you at $34,000, in reverse aimed at them now instead of you. Nobody mentions your last salary out loud because it stopped being the anchor a long time ago. The number they're building now isn't based on where you've been. It's based on what it would cost them if you went somewhere else instead. The offer isn't really negotiated in a single meeting. It's assembled over weeks by people trying to figure out exactly what would make you stop considering other rooms entirely. The seventh rule. At $600,000, there's no interview left. There's just the moment everyone in the room quietly agrees that you were never actually the one being evaluated. You just hadn't noticed yet. Somewhere right now someone is sitting in a gray waiting room, next to a water cooler nobody's touched, holding 6 printed copies of a resume with $34,000 typed at the top. Lane minutes. A stranger is going to decide what they're worth using a number that has nothing to do with what they can actually do. They think this interview is about proving themselves. It's not. It's about a number quietly deciding, before anyone says a word, how much of the truth about them the room is even willing to consider. The skill was always the same. The chair was always the same. Only the number sitting at the top of the page ever changed the shape of the room around it.